The 40 days of renewal and repentance that we call Lent culminate in the celebration of the three sacred days, the sacred Triduum, Thursday, Friday, and the vigil of Holy Week. Today marks the halfway point in our Lenten journey. And the themes for the readings, especially on the third, fourth, and fifth Sunday of Lent, really point us towards the celebration of Easter. There are themes of baptism, living water, conversion, renewal, moving from darkness to light, and even life conquering death. Last week, we had the woman at the well, talking with Jesus about living water, a symbol of the life that Jesus would bring, especially through the waters of baptism. And we'll be celebrating that on Easter as we renew our own baptismal promises and are sprinkled with the living water. This week, still in John's Gospel, we have the cure of the blind man. It's the theme of light overcoming darkness, another very Easter-oriented theme. And it's the theme we had in the second reading where Paul calls us to be children of the light and to overcome our darkness. And next week, it will be the raising of Lazarus from the dead, a foretaste of the resurrection of Jesus himself. So let's look at today's gospel in a little bit more detail and then ask, how is that inviting me or challenging me as I begin the second part of Lent? John 9 is a very carefully structured part of John's Gospel. And we have three primary actors in the story: Jesus, the blind man, and the Pharisees. While it is true that this is a miracle story, the blind man has his sight restored, the real story is not about sight, but insight. The insight that the man obtains in a gradual way as to who Jesus is. Just like in last week's story about the woman at the well, it's Jesus who takes the initiative. The woman did not start the conversation, nor did the blind man. Jesus is seeking out those who are in darkness, seeking out those who are in need of living water, seeking us out as we go through these days of renewal and repentance. After the cure, the man is asked, "Who is this person that cured you?" And he said, "He's a prophet." And we didn't have the question that came prior to that in the short version, but in the beginning he just said, "The man, Jesus, is the one who cured me." So his insight is growing. It's a man, he's a prophet. And then finally, when he has this conversation with Jesus, he acknowledges that Jesus is the Messiah, and he falls down and worships him. What might this say to you and me as we try to prepare for Easter and these great events? We must first recognize that while we're living in the light, some shadows may have crept in, shadows that have covered us with a sense of sin. And we need to uncover that and allow the light to reach us once more, so that we too, like the blind man, may gain insight as to who we are, what we have become, and what we want to be as we celebrate Easter. The late Cardinal Hume was a Benedictine monk before he was appointed to be the Archbishop of Westminster in England, the equivalent of London. He was a great preacher and teacher. One of the suggestions that he had for Lent says that we need to focus on three things that can separate us from our relationship with God. First, Hume would say there's pride. Pride when I put myself at the center of everything. A healthy pride is fine, but when I feel and live as if everything should revolve around me, and that I'm at the center, then we're off base. The second great sin Hume talks about is unkindness, a lack of charity, a lack of love, how that may have crept into my life. Those two are fairly common that might be talked about during Lent. But the third thing that he lists that separate us from the love of God might be surprising. It's grumbling. And he quotes from the rule of St. Benedict, the founder of his order, the Benedictines, really the founder of Western monasticism. And Benedict says, monks should not be grumblers. He says there's nothing worse than living with people who grumble. There's nothing more corrosive than grumbling, nothing more unsettling than grumbling. And it's not confined to monasteries. Maybe that's what we need to look at ourselves during these last weeks of Lent. Have I become a grumbler? One who is not satisfied with anything or anyone, who really finds fault instead of reason to praise. May we all reach the Holy Week and Easter celebrations more selfless, more loving, and less of a grumbler. And if you've not started your Lenten practice, it's not too late. As I said earlier, we're just at the halfway mark. There's just as much ahead of us as there is behind us. Let's take the advantage of how Jesus is approaching us and urging us to change.